everyone, Miss Hancock again with a tale from the garden house. It's a snowy story today and it's called One Snowy Night. Now you're going to meet Percy the park keeper and lots of wild animals that live in the park where Percy works. These animals are called wild because they live outside and make their own homes and find their own food. They don't live inside with us like our pets do. Now you're going to meet a squirrel, and squirrels have very bushy tails and they can be quite useful in very cold weather because they can wrap the bushy tail around them to keep warm. You'll meet rabbits, ducks, mice, and you'll also meet some bigger animals, a fox with its lovely reddy brown fur, and a badger, a black and white badger. Now, badgers only come out at night time, so it's very difficult to see one. And I've never seen one, but I'd really, really like to. And let's not forget a very prickly little animal called a hedgehog. Hedgehogs have thousands of spiky spines, and that makes them very difficult to pick up. But of course, they also protect the animal, because if a bigger animal wanted to catch it and maybe eat it, it would be very, very painful, all those spikes. And then there is a mole. Now moles live underground in the dark. They like digging tunnels and they eat ants and spiders, all sorts of bugs, but their favourite things are worms. So let's start our story. In the middle of the park there is a little hut, and this is where Percy lives. When it gets too cold to be outside, Percy goes into his hut where it's cosy and warm. The animals who live in the park all know Percy's hut because every day he shares his lunch with them. Now one winter's night it was so cold it began to snow. Great big snowflakes fell past the window of Percy's hut. "Oh," said Percy, "I think I'll need an extra blanket tonight." He made himself some hot cocoa and got ready for bed. Suddenly Percy heard a tapping sound. There was somebody at the door. "Now who can that be at this time of night?" thought Percy. So he went to the door and looked out. There on the step was a squirrel. It looked very cold and miserable. "I can't get to sleep, Percy," said the squirrel. "My bed is full of snow." "Oh dear," said Percy, "never mind. I've got plenty of room for two." And the squirrel snuggled down next to Percy and soon began to feel warm. Knock, knock. It was the door again. Now who can that be, thought Percy. Standing outside were two shivering rabbits. "It's for freezing," said one rabbit. "We're for frozen," said the other. "Oh, you poor thing," said Percy. "Come in and warm up." The rabbits squeezed into the bed next to Percy and the squirrel. There wasn't much room. Could you face the other way?" Percy asked the squirrel. "Your tail is tickling my nose." Knock, knock. "Oh dear," said Percy. "Now there's someone else at the door." It was a fox. He looked very cold and hungry. "Can I come in too?" he asked. Percy scratched his head and thought for a minute. Well, if you promise to behave," he said. "I promise," said the fox, and he squeezed into bed next to all the other animals. Bump! Whoops! The squirrel fell out. "Who did that?" asked the squirrel crossly. Again another knock at the door. "Good gracious," said Percy, "it's the door again." This time Percy had quite a surprise. There on the step was a badger, two ducks, a hedgehog, and a whole family of mice, and they all wanted a bed for the night. Poor old Percy, and poor old Percy's bed. The animals pushed and shoved and rolled around the bed, but there just wasn't enough room for them all. Soon the bed covers ended up in a big tight ball, and then bump, the covers rolled right off the bed and everybody fell on the floor. "Oh dear," said Percy, "this won't do at all. My bed is just too small." Suddenly one of the mice pricked up his ears. "What's that noise?" he squeaked. Everyone listened hard. Now they could all hear it. There was a scratching, scraping sound. It seemed to be coming from underneath them. "There's something moving under the floor," whispered Percy. The animals looked frightened and the mice all started to squeak at once. "Oh dear, what can it be? It might be a monster with fierce claws and sharp teeth." Well, the noise grew louder and louder. Then one of the floorboards began to move. Look out, it's coming up through the floor." Suddenly there was a loud creak. "Help!" cried the animals, and they all ran to hide. But Percy wasn't frightened. He started to chuckle, and then he laughed out loud. A small dark head was sticking up through the floorboards. "This isn't a monster," said Percy. "It's a mole." "Well, I'm so sorry to burst in like this," said the mole. "I did knock on the door, but nobody heard me." Percy helped the mole up through the hole in the floor, sat him on his hot water bottle to get him warm, and put the floorboard back. "It's all right, everyone," he called. "You can come out now." But nobody moved. Nobody stirred. Nobody wanted to come out. The squirrel was tucked away in the pocket of Percy's dressing gown. The hedgehog was in his coat. The fox, the rabbit, the badger and the ducks were all safely hidden away. The mice had even squeezed themselves into Percy's slippers. Everyone had found a cosy bed. "Well, I never," said Percy. Percy yawned and snuggled down in his own bed once again. "That's better. Now I've got plenty of room," he said, "and a little to spare. For a mole." And that's how kind Percy let all the animals in to keep warm in the cold, snowy winter night. Now I'm going to show you a picture with a lot of things in it, and I'm going to ask you to see if you can find some. Can you see the hedgehog in Percy's pocket? Can you see Percy's toothbrush? Look very carefully. Can you see a ball of string? Now this one's a hard one. Can you see a ladybird? But you'll have to look very carefully, and here's a clue. The ladybird is very close to the duck at the top. Can you see the ladybird? Well, there are lots and lots of things to see in this picture. But let's see, can you find all the animals and remember their names? I hope you enjoyed this story. Bye-bye.